Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the OFFbit. We're back for another season of the OFFbit. Now, over the next few months, we'll be releasing new content on our channel. But firstly, we'll be looking at the i7-2600K, this legendary CPU. Now, we want to know how well does the i7-2600K fare out in 2022. Now, the other big question is the i7-2600K the new budget king? So stay tuned and find out.
The i7-2600K is a 4-core 8-threaded beast back from 2011. The K series are known for their performance and overclocking potential with their unlock multipliers. Today we'll be running the stock clocks and stock voltages on this CPU, but there's definitely headroom for overclocking in this machine. The i7-2600K runs at 3.4 GHz and can boost up to 3.8 GHz on the stock clock settings. And finally, the CPU consumes a modest 95 watts. We're also using DDR3 RAM today from PQI. We have 8GB 4x2 sticks running at 1333 MHz. The GPU we're using today is NVIDIA GTX 670. The variant we're using today for the GTX 670 is from Galaxy. The GTX 670 still does alright in games in my opinion, and can be picked up at bargain prices. But the lack of API support could be a problem, but it shouldn't affect us too much today. The motherboard that we've used today is the Asus PB-Z77-VLK. This motherboard is an LGA 1155 base socketed motherboard on the Z77 chipset. We'll be running our standard drives for our tests, our 120GB Western Digital Green SSD for our operating system, the 256 SP SSD for some games. We also have the 1TB Western Digital Green magnetic drive. These are some of those bigger games that don't need the throughput. We'll be running Windows 10 x64 with build 1904. So let's go and check out the benchmarks and see what this system can actually do. In 7-zip, the i7-2600K shows a strong single-core performance across the board, only getting beaten by newer silicon of the 6700K and the 11400F. Still, not too far behind in 7-zip single-core benchmarks, but a bigger gap in the CPU ID benchmark. In Cinebench, the i7-6700K and 11400F were out in front in performance once again, and so it should be because they are much newer. Comparing to modern day processors, the i7-2600K is dwarfed in performance of the i5-11400F and the i7-6700K, and that 6700K is not what you'd call a new CPU anymore. Not in my opinion anyway. Now the i5-11400F does pack an extra 2 cores, which also stacked with hyperthreading gives it an extra 4 threads, which is 8 threads over what the i7-2600K offers. Now the question does beckon, where is your money best spent for better bang for buck? The Galaxy GTX 670 showed us good performance in Cinebench, giving us a frame rate of 78.41 frames per second. In Unigine Heaven, the GTX 970 pushed out well in front, almost doubling the score of the GTX 670. The GTX 770 sat well behind, but has been heavily bottlenecked by the Core 2 based Silicon Xeon of the E5430. So this value should be ignored for the GTX 770. Finally, in 3D Mark's Firestrike, the GTX 670 got a respectable score, but did sit behind the GTX 970. It was much closer to the GTX 770 with that slower CPU. GTX 670 did beat the RX 550, which is a more modern CPU, but at the entry level. But I think what these graphs do show is that this card with this system should be out of game. So let's check out some of the games, starting off with Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves is still a popular game online. We ran this game at 1920 by 1080 with medium to high details. In my opinion, this game has stunning graphics, and yet it can run on such older systems. Every time I come back to this game, the immersion and the graphics just grab me every single time. All you need to do is just add a bunch of mates and you have some great hours of adventures to be had. Sea of Thieves pretty much ran close to perfect, giving us smooth gameplay with this system, with only very little load lag, usually when islands need to be loaded from far away. Other than that, it's pretty much perfect gameplay. The average frame rate for Sea of Thieves was 57.9 frames per second. Our minimum frame rate sits 37.8 frames per second. Our maximum frame rate hit 88.4 frames per second, and our 0.1% lows hit a frame rate of 12 frames per second. The benchmarks really do show how well the system handles this game. So if you're looking for a cheap system, or you have a second or third gen i5, moving to an i7 with a decent video card, doesn't have to be that decent, you can pick up these GTX 660s and 670s for pretty cheap. But you should expect pretty good performance with a system like this and this game. Moving on to another classic, still widely played game in 2022 is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. CSGO is just one of those games that can just run on almost anything. We had our settings for a resolution of 1920 by 1080 with high details. This game really is a lot of fun, and it's a classic goodies versus baddies. And I'm pretty sure that 99, maybe 100% of the viewers of this channel have played this game. If you haven't, it is free on Steam, and you should pick it up and give it a go. Now on the system, this game really did give us some high frame rates. Pretty much nice smooth gameplay for the most of it. However, we did experience a couple of dips here and there, but nothing that was noticeable and compromise our gameplay. This is a really good game to play online, but we actually just played a bot game just so we could get into the game and play around with some of the settings. Now talking about settings, let's talk about the benchmarks that we netted from our settings. Our average frame rates for Counter-Strike Global Offensive was 138.5 frames per second. Our minimum frame rates hit a 31.8 frames per second low, and our maximum frame rate hit a whopping 338.5 frames per second. We did get some low 0.1% lows at a frame rate of 1.7 frames per second. So yes, this game did run quite well, but we did have a few bits of load lag, which mainly happened at the start of the match when everything was getting cached. But all in all, a good game. This game is a definite recommended game for this system. And like I said, if you haven't picked up Counter-Strike Global Offensive yet, it is free on Steam and it's worth a play. The next game we tried was EA's Star Wars Squadrons. This game went for free a couple of weeks ago on Epic, and so we made sure that we picked it up so we could give it a run through for you guys, our viewers. We ran Rogue Squadron at 1920 by 1080 with medium to high details. This game really is a throwback to the old classic X-Wing vs TIE Fighter games of the late 90s, immersing you in a Star Wars world as a pilot either for the good guys or the bad guys. We started off jumping into the single player campaign, starting off with this level. This game ran really smooth, giving us some smooth gameplay accompanied by some pretty models and graphics, though we did struggle a bit to use the mouse controls to fire the ship, but nothing we did not master by the end. This really is a fantastic game, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. Now let's talk about the benchmarks. Star Wars Squadrons gave us an average frame rate of 97.3 frames per second. The minimum frame rate hit a nice 60.1 frames per second. Our maximum frame rates hits 1,119.4 frames per second. This game is running great on this machine. Our 0.1% lows hit a frame rate of 31.9 frames per second. So this game ran great, though it would be interesting to see how much the system could bog down in a big battle, but there is plenty of headroom here for this system to crunch the numbers for smooth gameplay.
Bring your weapon systems online. Pilot, track it on your sensors and fire a small volley. Just enough to damage them. Then see if they're hiding the refugees. There, stop that ship.
Launching to the new chapter of Fortnite for 2022, we ran Fortnite at 1920 by 1080 with a max 3D resolution of 100%. We also ran the game with medium details on the DirectX 11 renderer. Fortnite played fairly well on this system, but I think the new chapter I need to tweak some of the graphics for a bit more of a better playing experience. But in saying that, it does look a lot more prettier than last season. Did have a few bits of low lag here and there, and we did experience some low frame rate dips from time to time. However, the game was still very much playable, and it really did give us a good experience all round at the end of this session. Fortnite Chapter 4 gave us an average frame rate of 74.9 frames per second. We did hit a low frame rate of a minimum of 23.8 frames per second. Our maximum frame rate hit a nice high of 121.7 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows hit a very low 1.9 frames per second. Do show the game gave us some stutter in the gameplay, which could be easily smoothed out by using lower graphics settings or by using the performance renderer. The i7-2600K did sometimes cap out on all threads on the CPU. So yes, there is a bit of headroom here and there, but at some parts of the game, you will max out this CPU. However, it didn't seem to affect gameplay too much. So, overall, Fortnite ran well, and we could recommend this setup for Fortnite. However, you may need to tweak some of the settings for better gameplay, but for the most of it, it's pretty good. One of the older games from our list is Minecraft. To be particular, we are running Minecraft Bedrock Edition. Basically, it's like playing Lego on your computer. And who doesn't love playing Lego? Minecraft is just one of those games I think will never die. It seems constantly getting updates from Microsoft, which keep the game up to date, adding more hardware support, giving better graphics over time, and most importantly, new content every year. From all these updates and new content, it's definitely made this game a lot more hungry than it used to be. So the entry level to play this game has definitely had the bar risen. However, you can still set the settings pretty low to run on older systems. However, that does come at a cost of visibility and looks. We ran Minecraft at 1920 by 1080 with high details and a render distance of 26 chunks. The game ran great on this machine and is what you'd expect on an i7-2600K with a fairly decent video card. However, with the chunks set to 26 as its draw distance, it did keep our CPU very busy. In fact, it was almost using full threads at 100% for most of the time. Though it did not affect gameplay, yes, maybe it didn't render some chunks so well and we could see through the world. However, it didn't take long for that to pull back in. Now, Minecraft Bedrock Edition on this system ran with an average frame rate of 59.9 frames per second. Minimum frame rate was 55.4 frames per second and our maximum frame rate was 62.5 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows came to 25 frames per second. Now, as the data says, this game ran well. We didn't get anything over 60 frames per second because this game does have a cap on its frame rate. But as the data shows, the performance sat around about 60 frames per second, giving us pretty much continuously smooth gameplay. So as usual, I'd recommend Minecraft Bedrock on a system just like this, and just as many other lower end systems, because this game is a great game that you could sink hours into, and you'll have a lot of enjoyment in the process. Now we did try a hand at Red Dead Redemption 2. The game did complain about the GPU drivers not being up to date, though we were using the newest versions that would support the GTX 670, so that posed a problem. The game managed to run, but we did run into issues from it crashing from time to time. In fact, it stopped us from actually getting the actual telemetry details of the frame rates, so we just had to eyeball it from the data that we have on the screen. The game did run well enough. We did run it at 1280 by 720 with low details. The CPU seemed to handle the game well enough, though it most of the time sat 80% on all threads. It seemed to me that the GPU seemed to be its bottleneck and its main problem causing crashes. So you probably want to steer clear from older cards such as the NVIDIA 600 series and less. I don't know how the 700 series work, but I imagine it's probably not going to be as bad as what we saw with this GPU. Now the game did give us an average frame rate of 39 frames per second with about a max frames per second of 50 frames per second. Now the game almost runs on the machine, but with a newer video card, this would probably be achieved. And you definitely want something a bit more gruntier than a 670, because playing at 30 frames per second is not bad, but it could be a lot better if you're sitting at 60. And it would be great to be able to use a high resolution and meet the 1080p minimum that I like to have. The final game we ran today was Overwatch 2. This game has only recently come out, but it seems very much similar to the original Overwatch in game feel and gameplay. The menus do seem a bit more animated and the characters have changed a little. There is apparently new characters on the way, and the biggest difference is that you no longer need to buy this game up front, which is a plus for players. Though some of the characters' abilities have changed, which would upset some. Overwatch 2 is still very much fun. I had a lot of fun playing this game, and on this system it ran perfectly smooth. We ran Overwatch 2 at 1920 by 1080 with high detail settings with 100% graphics resolution. Overwatch 2 gave us an average frame rate of 97.5 frames per second. Our minimum frame rates fell only to 60.8 frames per second, and our maximum frame rate hit 125.9 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows hit a frame rate of 40.8 frames per second. As the data shows, this game ran absolutely perfect on this machine, and being free, you really should add this game to your playlist of games.
Now, summing up this system. Yes, it's a great little system, this system. These days you can pick up the i7-2600 CPU, motherboard and RAM combos for under $100 Australian, or about 70 bucks USD. Yes, you can spend your money and pick up a newer generation i3 or i5 from Intel, or even some of the Ryzen systems secondhand would net you some great value at the moment. And yes, these systems will give you a stack more performance for gaming, and it would open up the gates of what you can play for the future. However, if you weigh up the cost of DDR4 versus DDR3, CPU and the motherboard that you add on top, your budget could be blown out. In some instances, you could even pick up these older Intel systems, Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge, for about 100 bucks Australian, like we said, but even sometimes you can get lucky and pick up the CPU, the RAM, the motherboard, the GPU, pretty much a whole case, a whole system for under $100 Australian. That is very cheap and that is great value. But to be honest, this system could be the new budget king. However, if you don't keep your eye on the costs, it could be one of your greatest wastes of money. Money which could be invested in a newer and much more capable system. So, on that note, I'd like to thank our Patreon supporters for their ongoing support. They keep this channel alive. If you'd like to see more or you would like to support us, check out the links down below in the description. And if you haven't yet already hit that subscribe button, hit that subscribe button. So once again, thank you for watching us, and we'll catch you guys next time on the OFFbit.